Imagine this, a nation crushed under fear, an enemy so ruthless that people hide in caves just survive, fields burned, homes destroyed, hope extinguished. And in the middle of this nightmare, God goes looking for a warrior, but he doesn't find one. Instead, he finds a man hiding at the bottom of a wine press, sweating, shaking, secretly threshing wheat so the enemy won't steal it. A man whose first instinct is not a fight, but to stay unseen. A man who calls himself the least, the weakest, the last one God should choose. This is a story of a God who sees courage where no one else does. A God who calls out destiny in the most unlikely people. A God who turns cowards into commanders and tiny armies into unstoppable forces. A God who speaks words that make no sense. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Before this story ends, 300 trembling men will face an army too large to count, and the most fearful man in Israel will become the leader who frees a nation. But the real question is this: what does God see in you that you've been too afraid to believe? This is when God calls a coward. Gideon Story. Let's begin.
For 7 years, the darkness had a name: Midian. They weren't just an enemy. They were a plague, a relentless tide of destruction that washed over our land season after season. For 7 long years we, the children of Israel, had turned our backs on God. And in that silence, He gave us over to our enemies. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other peoples from the east would swarm our valleys like locusts. Their camels and tents were too numerous to count. They were a shadow on the horizon that promised nothing but starvation. We'd plant our crops with hope in our hearts, our hands working the very soil our ancestors had been promised. We'd watch the little green shoots emerge, a fragile promise of life. And then, just as the harvest was ready, they would come. They'd sweep through the land, a merciless force, devouring everything. They didn't just take the grain. They ruined the fields, leaving nothing behind. Not a sheep, not an ox, not even a donkey. They were stripping the life from our land, and with it, our hope. The oppression was so complete, so suffocating that we abandoned our homes. We became a people of the shadows, making our homes in mountain crevices, in caves, and in hidden strongholds. The land of promise had become a prison of fear. We went from being a proud nation, delivered from Egypt with wonders and signs, to a scattered, broken people, crying out to a God we felt had abandoned us.
This was the world I lived in. I am Gideon, son of Josh, from the clan of Abiezer in the tribe of Manasseh. And my whole world had boiled down to one thing: survival. While others might have prayed for a hero, I was just trying to keep my family from starving. Every single grain of wheat was precious, a tiny victory against the famine. And every victory had to be won in secret. This is where my story really begins. Not on a battlefield, but in a hiding place. Not with a sword in my hand, but with a flail. I was in the wine press, a pit dug into the rock, hidden from view. A place meant for crushing grapes had become my secret threshing floor. With every swing of the flail, beating the wheat to separate the grain from the chaff, my heart hammered with fear. I wasn't thinking about valor or deliverance. I was thinking about Midianite patrols, about dust clouds on the horizon, about the sound of approaching camels. I was a farmer, a son, and a man terrified of being discovered. I was convinced that I was the least in my father's house, and my clan was the weakest in all of Manasseh. In a nation of victims, I felt like the most insignificant of them all. It was there, in that pit of fear, hunched over and hidden, that my whole world turned upside down. One moment, there was just the thud of the flail and the dusty air. The next, there was a presence. I looked up, and an angel of the Lord was sitting under a nearby oak tree, just watching me. And then he spoke. The words were so disconnected from my reality that I thought I had to be imagining things. He looked at me, Gideon, a man hiding in a hole, and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior? The words just hung there, thick with irony. I stopped my work and stared. Was this some kind of cruel joke? My response wasn't faith or awe. It was bitter, sarcastic desperation. "Pardon me, my lord," I shot back, the words dripping with 7 years of pain. "But if the Lord is with us, Why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders our ancestors told us about when they said, "Didn't the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?" No, the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. My words were a challenge, born from a place of deep disappointment. I'd heard the stories of the God who parted the Red Sea, but he seemed like a character from a history book. My God was silent, and his people were starving. The angel was unfazed. His gaze was steady. And then the Lord himself turned to me and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand." Am I not sending you? The strength I have? The only strength I had was the strength to hide. The command was insane. "Pardon me, Lord," I said again, my voice trembling now, not with sarcasm, but with genuine panic. "How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." I laid my weakness bare, offering it up as the perfect excuse. Surely, he had the wrong guy, but God doesn't see the way we see. He didn't argue with me. He didn't tell me I was secretly strong or important. He just bypassed my weakness entirely. "I will be with you," he said, "and you will strike down all the Midianites as if they were but one man." The promise was so huge, so impossible, it did nothing to quiet my fears. An army of locusts taken down by a man hiding in a wine press? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I needed something tangible. I needed proof this was real. "If I found favor in your eyes," I pleaded, "give me a sign that it's really you talking to me." I offered to prepare a meal, a young goat and some bread, if he would just wait. He agreed. I rushed to prepare it, my hands working with a new kind of urgency. This was a desperate plea for certainty. I brought the meat and broth and presented them to him. The angel of God then told me, "Place the meat and the bread on this rock and pour out the broth." I did it, my heart pounding. This was the moment. The angel reached out the tip of his staff, touched the offering, and instantly, fire shot up from the rock and consumed everything. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. Terror and awe crashed over me all at once. It was real. The realization brought a new fear, the old belief that no one could see God and live. "Sovereign Lord," I cried out, "I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." A voice of peace cut through my panic. "Peace, don't be afraid. You're not going to die." That night, I built an altar there and called it "The Lord is Peace." In the very place where my fear had been confronted, I learned my first lesson. Peace isn't the absence of a battle. It's the presence of God in the middle of it. The peace of that night was quickly replaced by a new command. My encounter with God had been private, but my obedience had to be public. That same night, the Lord spoke again. "Take the second bull from your father's herd. Then tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a command to face a foreign enemy. This was a command to confront my own family, my own town. The altar to the pagan god Baal belonged to my father, Josh, and the Asherah pole was a symbol of idol worship that stood right in our community. God was telling me that before I could fight the enemy out there, I had to tear down the idols in here. Israel's deliverance had to start in my own backyard. I was terrified. I knew the men of the town would kill me. Their loyalty was to Baal. To defy their God was to defy them. So I did what I did best. I acted in secret. I couldn't do it by day, so I took 10 of my servants, and under the cover of darkness, we went to do the unthinkable. With every blow of the axe against that wooden pole, I expected the sky to fall. With every stone we pulled from Baal's altar, I expected the ground to swallow us. We worked fast, tearing down the symbols of our unfaithfulness. Then, as God instructed, we built a proper altar to the Lord on that same high ground. We took the bull and burned it as an offering, using the wood from the Asherah pole for fuel. An act of desecration became the fuel for true worship. The next morning, the town was in an uproar. Their altar was gone. Their sacred pole was a pile of ashes. When they found out I did it, a mob came for me. They went to my father, their faces twisted with rage. "Bring out your son," they demanded. "He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar." I braced myself. My first act of obedience was about to be my last. But then, something amazing happened. My father, the owner of the altar, stood up to the entire town. "Are you going to plead Baal's case?" He challenged them. If Baal really is a god, he could defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. And with those words, he gave me a new name. "Let Baal contend with him," my father said. So they call me Jerubbaal, which means let Baal contend. My act of defiance had a name, and Baal of course did nothing. I had survived. My first taste of the truth. Obedience to the one true God is its own protection. But that doubt, my old friend, still lingered. Soon, the armies of Midian gathered again, camping in the valley of Jezreel. The threat was no longer a rumor. It was a massive army on our doorstep. The Spirit of the Lord came on me, and I blew the ram's horn, calling the tribes to arms. Men from Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali answered the call. An army was gathering. It was really happening. But was I truly the one to lead them? The weight of it all was crushing. I looked at the men who trusted me, and I felt that cold grip of uncertainty. I had to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God was going to do what he said. I needed another sign. I went before God, my heart torn. "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said," I began, "I'll put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece, and all the ground is dry, then I'll know." It was a bold, almost childish request. But God, in his incredible patience, met me in my weakness. The next morning, the ground all around was bone dry. But when I picked up the fleece, I squeezed a whole bowl full of water out of it. The sign was undeniable. And yet, my fearful heart wasn't satisfied. A fleece could naturally absorb dew. Maybe it wasn't a miracle. I went back to God, feeling foolish but too desperate to stop. "Please don't be angry with me," I pleaded. "Let me test just once more. This time, let the fleece be dry, and let there be dew on all the ground." I was asking for the impossible, for nature to be reversed. And once again, he answered. That night, God did it. When I went out in the morning, the ground was covered in dew. But the fleece? It was completely and utterly dry. There were no more excuses, no more room for doubt. God had met my skepticism with patience and my fear with power. The time for testing was over. The time for trusting was about to begin.
Before we continue, if this story is speaking to you, if you've ever felt unqualified, unseen, or too afraid to be who God called you to be, take a moment and hit that like button so this message can reach others who need it too. And if you want more animated Bible stories that bring scripture to life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Alright, back to Gideon. Because the moment he takes his first small step of courage, everything begins to change.
With my heart finally bolstered by the signs, I felt a flicker of confidence. I looked out at the 32,000 warriors of Israel who had gathered. It was a respectable army. For the first time, I felt like we might actually have a chance. We camped at the spring of Harod, and below us, the Midianite camp sprawled out, an army as vast and countless as a swarm of locusts. It was then that God spoke to me again, and his words undid all my newfound confidence. "You have too many men," the Lord said. "I can't deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel will boast. My own strength has saved me." Too many? I looked at the endless enemy tents and then back at my army. How could we have too many? We were already outnumbered. But God's logic isn't the logic of generals. He was about to teach me the most terrifying and liberating lesson of all. His strength is made perfect in our weakness. Announced to the army, God said, "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back." I did, expecting a few hundred to leave. I watched in stunned silence as 22,000 men turned and walked away. 2/3 of my army, gone. We were down to just 10,000. I looked at my remaining men, a smaller but determined force. Surely, now God was satisfied. "There are still too many," the Lord said. My heart sank. What was he doing? "Take them down to the water," God commanded, "and I will thin them out for you there. Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel to drink," the Lord told me. I watched as most of them, 9,700 men, knelt down, putting their faces in the water. But a small handful, just 300, stayed alert. They cupped water in their hands and lapped it, their eyes still scanning, ready for a fight. With the 300 men who lapped, "I will save you," the Lord declared. "Let all the others go home." And just like that, my army was gone. 32,000 had become 300. I stood there with a band of men so small it was a joke, looking down at that massive enemy camp. The math of man said this was impossible. My old friend, fear, came rushing back in colder than ever. I was going to lead these 300 men to their deaths. God, who knows our hearts, saw my terror. That night, he spoke to me. "Get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands." And then he added words of pure grace. "If you're afraid to go down with your servant Pura and listen to what they're saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged." He didn't rebuke my fear. He made a path through it. So Pura and I crept down toward the edge of the sprawling enemy camp. We got close to the outer sentries, and then we heard it. One soldier was telling his friend about a dream. "I had a dream," the man whispered. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into our camp. It struck a tent with such force that the tent collapsed. Barley bread, the food of the poor, the food of the starving Israelites. I held my breath as his friend replied, his voice filled with a strange certainty. "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Josh, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." There, in the heart of the enemy camp, from the mouth of an enemy soldier, God gave me my final sign. He had turned their dreams into a prophecy of their own doom. The fear that had paralyzed me vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, unshakable faith. I felt my knees right there in worship. The battle was already won, not by my strength, but by the promise of God. I returned to our small camp, my steps filled with purpose. The fear was gone. "Get up," I called out to my 300 men, my voice ringing with a new confidence. "The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." The plan God gave me was as crazy as the army he'd chosen. Our weapons wouldn't be swords. They would be trumpets, empty clay jars, and torches. A strategy of psychological warfare. I divided the 300 men into 3 companies. To each man, I gave a ram's horn, a clay jar, and a lit torch to hide inside it. The instructions were simple, but required perfect trust. "Watch me," I told them. "Follow my lead. When I and my group blow our trumpets, you blow your trumpets all around the camp and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Under the thick cover of the middle watch of the night, we moved into position. 3 small groups of men surrounding a sleeping army that seemed to stretch on forever. The camp was quiet. The guards had just changed. I stood with my 100 men, the coal jar in one hand, the trumpet in the other. My heart pounded with anticipation. This was it. I lifted the ram's horn to my lips, and I blew. The sound cut through the night. Instantly, 299 other trumpets answered from all sides. At the same moment, we smashed our clay jars on the ground. The sharp crash sounded like shattering armor, and as the jars broke, 300 hidden torches blazed to life, surrounding the camp in a flickering ring of fire. Then we shouted, 300 voices as one. "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Midianites woke up to chaos. They heard a massive army, saw themselves surrounded by fire, and absolute panic tore through the camp. In the darkness, they couldn't tell friend from foe. The Lord turned their own swords against each other. They began fighting and killing their own men. We, the 300, just stood our ground, holding our torches and blowing our trumpets. We didn't have to lift a single sword. We were witnesses to the salvation of the Lord as the enemy defeated themselves, fleeing in a terrified rout toward the Jordan River. The impossible had happened. A victory not of might, but of a miracle. Not of numbers, but of obedience. The battle was won. We pursued the fleeing Midianite kings and secured the victory God had given us. The land, which had suffered for 7 long years, was finally free. For 40 years, our nation had peace. After the victory, the men of Israel came to me. "Rule over us," they said. "You, your son, and your grandson. You have saved us." They wanted to make me a king. They saw the man of victory. but I finally saw the truth. It was never about me. I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. I told them, the Lord will rule over you. That was the whole point of my journey. The victory was his. The glory was his. The power was his. I was just the weak man he had chosen to make strong. My story began in a wine press, hiding in fear defined by my weakness. I was sure I was a coward, the least of my people. But God called me a mighty warrior. He didn't deny my weakness. He used it. He didn't erase my fear. He walked me through it. He showed me that real strength isn't being fearless. It's acting despite the fear. He taught me that faith isn't having no doubts, but choosing to trust him anyway. He took an army of 32,000 and stripped it down to 300, not to test their strength, but to prove that his power was all that was needed. He wanted the victory to be so undeniably his that no one could ever take the credit. Maybe you feel like I did. Maybe you're hiding in your own wine press, convinced you're too weak, too insignificant, too broken for God to ever use. Maybe you look at your challenges and they look like an army of Midianites. Maybe you hear God calling you to do something that feels impossible, and your first response is, how can I? I'm a nobody. If that's you, remember my story. Remember, God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. He chooses the weak things to shame the strong. Your weakness isn't a disqualification. It's an opportunity for God to show his strength. The question isn't, are you strong enough? The question is, are you willing? Are you willing to trust his plan, even when it looks like a suicide mission? Are you willing to smash your jar of self-reliance and let his light shine through? Because the same God who met a coward in a wine press is the same God who meets you today, right where you are. And he is still in the business of doing the impossible with the unlikely.
Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story of finding strength in weakness resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories of faith and transformation. I have a question for you. In what area of your life do you feel like you're hiding in a wine press? And how can you trust God's strength in that place today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's encourage one another. Thank you for watching.